as the Korean War was winding down, they were quick to discharge as many people as they could. And Congress was on the back, of course, the Air Force cut down, cut down. So in late August of 1953, I returned to IBM in Chicago. I don't think they were that excited to get me back. You recall I was in the bottom of my class. But I showed up and started working again. And they needed somebody badly out in Moline, Illinois, over on the Mississippi River, to help a branch manager who was ill. And he needed an extra leg or two. And I think part of the fact that I was a bottom feeder of the class, and I was also single and didn't have a family, they sent me out to Moline for 6 months. And that was a great experience because I could learn what I was doing in a small, more able to get my arms around it atmosphere, and working very closely with the salesman and the manager, smaller operation, and got good customer experience, and lived in a rooming house. But it was just an experience that I loved very much. Got to know the people in the branch, the customer engineers, the administrative people. We socialized together. It was a different atmosphere than great big downtown Chicago. And then at a certain point, they came to me, and things were more positive, and said they had the same problem. They needed me to go up to Grand Rapids, Michigan, if I would, and be part of that branch for a while. And I said I'd be delighted to. And I went up there, and I lived in Muskegon, Michigan, right on Lake Michigan, and beautiful beaches, incidentally, and was assigned to several big accounts. And I also learned to go out and prospect and to call on accounts and sell small businesses on my own, and got my confidence. And the district manager would periodically come to visit. His name was Gordon Smith. He was a very tall, impressive man. And eventually I went off to sales school. And that was back in Endicott, New York, but no tents this time. We stayed at the Frederick Hotel again. And I ended up at the top of my class in Endicott. And so we'd gotten out of our slump and went back to Chicago and was given a territory, the great big merchandise mart, and then a few customers on the side. The merchandise mart had hundreds of small retail businesses in it, their headquarters. Their plants are usually somewhere else, but that's where you went to sell them. And it was very difficult selling. If you wanted to call on the controller of this company, there would be a waiting room, and he would come out and meet you in front of all the other salesmen sitting there selling something else, and you'd have to make your pitch in front of those other guys before he'd take you in and let you have a sit-down meeting. That was tough going, let me tell you, but you learned a lot from it. I was given one good account, which was the Tony Home Permanent Company. Tony had been one of these terrific, successful, what we now call IPOs. And that was also highly valuable to me because the man I dealt with, the assistant controller, Bill Smith, was tough as nails. And the first time I met him, he stood up, put his finger on my chest. He says, "McKittrick," this was a lesson, okay? He says, "McKittrick, I expect service. We're paying IBM rent, thousands a month rent. I want ideas, and when I want something, I want service. If not, out." And I think your first week in your new territory, having a customer clarify things like that for you was highly valuable. And I always considered that an important lesson learned. Eventually, I was assigned the banks. By this time, the punch card accounting was being slowly phased out, and computers were coming in. And I was given the First National Bank of Chicago, Continental Bank, Harris Trust, and Northern Trust, and also Montgomery Ward, which was considered a retail store, but they weren't spending much money, so it was considered a bank, jokingly. And what we were doing here was trying to get the banks ready for what was going to be an era of data processing. And in those days, the checks had no account numbers, and you had to sort them all by hand. And as volume was growing, the banks could see eventually they were going to have 100 people every day just sorting checks. But getting them to put an account number on, now you don't think anything of having an account number, but I can remember talking to bankers. They'd say, Charles, Aunt Sadie doesn't want to be known as number 21687. She wants to be known as Aunt Sadie. We can't have account numbers. Well, eventually we did. And then if you look at your checks and see the squiggles on the bottom, we worked to develop that. Some outside companies and IBM and research company, and this was called type font E13B, the bottom of your check to this very day. And IBM developed a machine that would sort the checks each day by account number or however they were going to sort them because of the writing on the bottom of the check, the ink on the bottom of the check. So we spent several years getting people to the point where they could buy it. And at this particular point in time, I got promoted, my first promotion in IBM, from salesman on those banks to a special representative in banking, where I traveled all over the Midwest and helped salesmen like I had been in different branch offices sell the banks, because we had the experience. I could tell on the telephone what the guy's problem was when he called me, because I'd had enough experience, and I'd go out and try. Meanwhile, we were trying to get people interested, and we were going to announce this sorter reader, the first sorter reader that had ever existed in the world to sort checks. And I was very fortunate to be selected by IBM to announce this, and it was the first nationwide videotape that IBM had ever used. They'd had radio broadcasts, but never a video broadcast. And I stood up and said, "Here it is," and then demonstrated the machine to all the IBM offices on this videotape. The videotape, incidentally, was about 3 to 4 inches wide. Entirely different videotape that we got used to today. And then later on, came digital. At this point in time, we did announce the sorter reader. It was a great success. We were fortunate enough to get the first order in the United States, and that was from the First National Bank of Minnesota. And it was a period of time that was a very happy time. I worked all the time, had very little social life, but it was one of those times in life where you're an expert. You really know your subject cold, and it's fun to do your work because you know you're really making a contribution. And now IBM at this point in time, though, we ought to just chat about it. Remember, this was blue suits, black shoes, wing-top shoes, white shirts, ties, careful grooming. We always had professional women in IBM, always, and they were always highly respected because they were our teachers and they were our system specialists who bailed us out of trouble when we sold the wrong thing. And so we had, but now we were beginning to slowly bring in more women in the sales force, just beginning at the very, very, very early stages. About this time then, I was promoted a second time, and this was to banking manager in Los Angeles, California. And this is very important because that's where I would meet Alice, that's where I would meet her parents, the McCauslins, and that's where I would start to build my reputation further in banking.